Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. There's something peaceful about seeing a small herd of animals grazing in a pasture. For many of us, what gets lost in the serenity is that the animals are working. Putting sheep, cows, or goats out on pasture is a tried and true agricultural practice. And when grazing is done well, the benefits to the animals, environment, and the community are exponential. Across the fence's Keith Silva takes us to Huntington, where the animals are raised to graze.
These animals look great.
At Brushbrook Community Farm in Huntington, the grass is green, the animals are fed, and the farmers are busy.
We're doing a really intensive grazing, which means they're moving at least once a day, sometimes twice a day.
Adam Wilson runs the farm. He's invited fellow farmers and agricultural educators to see his pastures and talk about how he uses rotational grazing to manage animals.
Come on, mamas!
The practice of rotational grazing is straightforward. Animals are moved from one paddock or pasture to the next, which provides a never-ending buffet of grasses and greens. In recent years, rotational grazing has become a popular practice because of the benefits it provides to the animals and the environment, something Wilson has seen firsthand.
This field was largely bare ground and goldenrod 4 years ago, and through largely the rotational grazing, some feeding of hay in the winter to put additional manure down, clipping with scythes behind the animals to knock down the goldenrod and other weeds. This is some of the most prime pasture that we graze after 4 years of doing this work here with the animals.
This is a good example of how we like to see it done.
Kimberly Hagan is a grazing specialist with UVM Center for Sustainable Agriculture. She's advised Wilson on how to manage animals using rotational grazing.
They graze the sheep, they observe them, they see, okay, maybe it's time we move them now. So they're moving them once, twice, sometimes 3 times a day. These are happy animals. I wish that all of our sheep farms looked like this.
We want to see the rotation plan for the farm, their pasture
Kyla
plan.
Bedard works with the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Vermont as a certification specialist with a focus on livestock. She's as impressed with what the animals are eating as what they're leaving behind.
When we're looking at pastures, seeing the residuals is always good. We don't want to see it scalped down to that golf course, bare. We really want to encourage regrowth. Biodiversity is a big part of it as well. I noticed in Adam's pasture there was a variety of plants, not just all grasses. There's also some dandelions or plantains. And in organic, biodiversity is a huge component because we believe that having a more biodiverse ecosystem also leads to a more balanced ecosystem.
Rotational grazing has been used by farmers for centuries, and long before humans built barns to house livestock.
Even if it wasn't hot and sunny, they'd still be breathing faster than us, so it can be very deceiving.
Sam Dixon, the dairy farm manager at Shelburne Farms, is an advocate for grass-based farming. For him, this is what cows and sheep are born to do.
This is actually the natural state for many of these animals, is outside on the grass, grazing, being outside. This is where they're the happiest. The air quality is the best. The feed is usually of the highest quality, particularly if you're rotational grazing like Adam is doing here, where you're moving the animals and you're not doing what's called set stocking, just putting animals in a pasture and leaving them there until it's grazed down to astroturf, but just actually moving them around and keeping them onto the freshest, most nutritious grass.
The pastures where Wilson grazes his livestock run alongside Huntington's main road, which offers both a blessing and a curse when it comes to interacting with the public.
Almost every single one of our fields is highly visible from the road, which means that people in town, they're not only getting to know us as the farmers when they come to pick up food at the stand, but they're getting to know the animals really intimately and having the opportunity to observe their behavior and sometimes asking questions like, why are the animals in such small areas? Or why don't you just let them go stand in the shade all day? Or questions like that. But that is really so valuable, even if it's also a lot of energy sometimes, that public interface.
Dixon and Hagan see the public's curiosity about farm practices as a way to educate and enlighten.
At Extension, we work very hard to be the in-between for the public and the farming community. The thing that's hardest for people to understand is that animals have different needs than humans do. They really, they operate very differently. So they don't have the same kind of body systems for dealing with weather. You know, we need outer coats, shoes, gloves, hats, but they just have these systems. They learn how to either shut down or open up their pores to let more, you know, to exhaust more heat. Whatever it is, they've got those things in place.
I think it's just a general disconnect from farming and livestock farming in particular. So many people have lost that connection with where their food comes from and how it's grown. And I also think there's been a lot of exposure around some of industrial farming and some of the practices that people have a lot of trouble with, so they equate that with every animal that they see.
With agriculture, with domestic
Wilson sees himself as a caretaker. He takes care of the animals because they take care of him.
They're hardworking animals, and I always think that. I mean, they're hardworking. We're hardworking on the farm. There's many days where we're out working in the sun when we might prefer to sit with our feet in the river, but there's a lot of work to do, and they certainly model that.
The hard work going on at Brushbrook Community Farm pays off in healthy animals and productive pastures using a practice from the past that's preserving the future for Vermont agriculture. In Huntington, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
The public interface that farmer Adam Wilson referred to is multifaceted. Some Huntington residents have alleged that the animals at Brushbrook Community Farm are mistreated. They say the farmers fail to provide adequate shelter and water. Across the Fence reached out to the Huntington Animal Control Officer, Pam Alexander. Alexander tells us that she and the state police conducted an extensive investigation, which found that the animals are in good health and the farm's practices in compliance with state laws. Joining us now via Zoom is Kimberly Hagan. Kimberly is the grazing specialist with UVM Extension Centers for Sustainable Agriculture. Welcome. Thank you for being here. And
Fran.
Yeah, and Kimberly, how often do you hear about potential conflicts between farmers and their non-farming neighbors?
You know, there's been a pretty steady increase, I would say, in the last 4 to 5 years. I'm answering more calls on this issue. And these farmers that, you know, keep their animals where they're in visible sight of public are actually quite courageous. You know, and I think that I attribute this, you know, this increase really to the change in the number of people farming in our society today. Right now, it's about 1.3 of our population are engaged in some kind of agricultural production. But, you know, just I think it was about 1920, we had 64% of the population was engaged. So that's a pretty, you know, almost 70% drop in 2 generations.
Right.
So people aren't connected to it so much anymore.
Well, and you know, given this farm, how long can animals stay outside on pasture? I mean, the grasses do stop growing at some point come winter.
Sure, they do, but the animals can still be outside. And the thing that we have found, and any farmer will tell you this, that when the animals are outside, they're so much healthier. They don't have nearly as many problems with respiratory or foot problems that they do when they're put in confinement. So we find ways that we can move them around. That's the secret, is that we've got to keep them moving. And as long as they have access to, you know, food, which, you know, you can bring hay out to them in the field, they much prefer to be outside.
Great, and so clearly the impact on their health is very good to be outside, even in all kinds of weather.
Sure, you know, I mean, I can think of, you know, I think most animals would probably seek some kind of shelter if there's a driving rain or a rain that changes to sleet or something like that, or high winds. But for the most part, they much prefer to be outside.
And then what's the ratio of animals to land that you advise farmers use in rotational grazing in that kind of system?
You know, that's a really complicated question. It's one I deal with every day quite a bit. And there's so many variables. We do have, you know, we find out how many animals a producer has, and what their game plan is, what their goals are, and how much land they do have. And then we look at how much that land produces per acre. And then we can come up with a system, a guideline But then you've got, the variables that weather brings us, like a summer like this, where it's been so dry. A lot of the producers, the plan that they had for their grazing system is not quite adequate. So they've had to come up with some adjustments. So observation's the best tool.
Okay, and in the video we heard about how grazing improves plant diversity. What are some other environmental benefits of putting animals out to pasture?
Well, as my vet always told me, Dr. Sun and Dr. Rain. Sunshine and fresh air, you just can't compare that. And, it's so much better for an animal than being confined into, airspace. You'll see that any big farm where they are confined, they do have to have big fans to keep that air circulating.
Yeah. So Kimberly, I'm sorry we've got to stop there. We're just about out of time, and I want to make sure people know where to get more information on rotational grazing. They can go to the website for UVM Center for Sustainable Agriculture. The address is uvm.edu/extension/sustainable agriculture. Kimberly Hagan of UVM Extension, thank you so much for your time and expertise and in joining us today.
Sure. Nice. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Stay well.